so don't forget. Okay, well, today we have a very special guest, Dr. Andrey Dolgikh, who I know from Russia. We met actually one of conferences on urban soil back in 2015 in Mexico. And that's why I keep telling you that the conferences are super important to attend, because you make this really amazing connections. Of course, for me, it's very special because it's, it's a Russian connection. I learned a lot from Andrey for this years that I know him, and listening to his research, really adventurous research. Like, he traveled literally all around the world and seen lots of different places, different soils, and not just natural soils, but also anthropogenic or cultural soils, like cultural layers. When they did a lot of historical archaeological sites in European part of Russia, the most ancient part of Russia, which is, I think, is also very impressive. So talk about polar soils in Antarctic and Arctic, and actually see what kind of pedogenesis is taking place there.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for invitation by Anna. It's a good pleasure for me to talk about polar soils. For me, polar soils are the best soils, and especially in southern part of our Earth, because it's the most specific places without any people. And if you want to be alone with your colleagues, with your friends, without any polar bears, any dangerous situations, Antarctic is the best place for work, for think, without any normal internet access, without any usual problems, and specifically polar regions and polar areas. It's a good help to understand in your life. And if you will go to these areas and regions, you will see and you will taste the smell, the any kind of this specific region. So today we will talk about pedogenesis of polar soils, soil diversity, soil geography, and specific differences between our two main polar regions, Arctic and Antarctic. I have some experience in investigations, in field investigations. First, my place where visited polar region was were in Antarctica 10 years ago in Russian Antarctic expeditions. So 4 expeditions at this moment to the several Antarctic oases, such as Schirmacher, Thala Hills, Larsemann Hills, and and Bunger Hills area. Why these areas? Because some Russian Antarctic stations and field bases are situated in this area, and Antarctic is full territory in Antarctic as forbidden and closed for any investigations, because it's too difficult to make logistic. And if you have, and if your country has possibility to visit Antarctica, you also can to visit and investigate. But if you want to see or visit another area, another part of Antarctic, is also too difficult, because you must connect. You have to connect, you have to discuss, and unfortunately at this pandemic time, any collaborations with field investigations a little bit stopped for I don't know how much time, but now, for example, in 66th Russian Antarctic expeditions, the summer field season for summer scientists like me, soil geographer, is closed because not enough places. It's just logistic for normal winter operations, all-year operations with some all-year stations. But in Arctic, we have more possibilities to visit and investigate. In my career, several expeditions in subarctic zone in European Russia, and in Arctic, in high Arctic, it's just Svalbard or Spitsbergen, Franz Josef Land, and northern part of Novaya Zemlya archipelago. What is the main soil factor for soil forming, the main environmental factor? Of course, it's permafrost. Permafrost is not unique in our soil system, sun system, sorry. We also know that water permafrost are in Mars, but we don't have the same data like in this screen, on this slide. We don't have a lot of investigations on ground because it's just first steps with some NASA equipment, but we know a lot of fresh data about permafrost in Earth. And on this slide you can see big difference between northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere. Big part of Antarctic glacier, of Antarctic big dome, such as 3 domes in eastern part of Antarctic and several in western part of Antarctic, too much fresh water, and very low content of the area without ice. But another one in northern hemisphere, big glacier, and in Greenland, and also in Canadian northern archipelagos, some small glaciers in Russian Arctic, and also in Norwegian Svalbard or Spitsbergen. And big part in boreal climate. Sometimes in southern variants of boreal climate in Eurasia, we can see a lot of territory with continuous permafrost, and of course with sporadic, discontinuous, and isolated patches. And the role of Atlantic Ocean is very big for European part of Eurasia. Here you can see another situations with distribution of permafrost, just northern part of main continent, and also in every islands. But for example, in Antarctica, we know that for example, thickness in Eurasia, in this part, in western eastern part of Eurasia, more than 1,000 and more meters for permafrost, for actual data. And for southern hemisphere in Antarctica, it's just small regions like oases or nunataks or transantarctic mountains. Here we can expect big thickness of permafrost, sometimes more than 100 meters. But we need more fresh data. We need for more field investigations on the ground. So we will see the future. And what is the important role in permafrost? First, the thickness of active layer. The layer in summertime with plus degree temperature. And for example, in Franz Josef Land, in Arctic zone, it corresponds from half of meter till from 25 centimeters to 75 centimeters. The same we can find in shore of Antarctica, in small oases, but sometimes is less than a half meter. And for example, in Transantarctic mountain, in the part close to South Pole, the thickness of active layer it's about 10 centimeters. So it's a lot of time during the year. All objects are frozen and no any possibilities to normal chemical weathering, just physical weathering. And of course, in both polar zones, the active layer thickness depending on elevation and also latitude, but not for Antarctic. Latitude is not main factor. The portion of ice-free area, the thickness of glacier around the oasis is most important factor. And in permafrost, why is the permafrost? Because in permafrost we have ice, and in the hard barrier, when the water is going from liquid form to the hard form, and ice increases its volume while being frozen up to 10%. And when we have climate with a very cold season and percents of moisture, we expect more things with this permafrost. On this slide, you can see the main processes for formation pattern ground and permafrost polygons. And first here is the physical processes with frozen and thawed, and during several centuries and sometimes several thousand years, frozen thawed cycles when the ice wedges formed in cracks, and then we see the products of cryoturbation. So if we have permafrost, we have specific conditions and specific processes with profile cryoturbation and with the grout and lateral processes for all territory with permafrost. On this slide, you can see the example of ice wedge in some part of Yamal Peninsula with histosols, with a lot of part of raw organic material. And it's very important role of polar soils. I will talk about this a little bit later. On this slide, you can see several types and several forms of permafrost complexes. And of course, parent material, the content of fine earth and parent material, the content of massive crystalline rocks, the age of the territory. For example, the duration of non-ice period. For example, in Western Siberia, it's more than 10,000 years, and in Kola Peninsula, it's close to Western Siberia, it's less than 10,000 years, and it's two different age and another situation. But for example, on this right side, in the central part of right side slide, it's McMurdo Drake Valley in Western Antarctic. It's a dry valley, and the age for deglaciation time, it's more than 1,000 years. It depends of territory, of course, but sometimes more than 300,000 years. Then, sorting on the ground, turbations and forming pattern ground. On the right side, you can see the result of sorting processes when the fine earth is collecting in the central part of polygon, and on the crack you can expect just coarse earth. Also, in this crack we see after digging and excavation, we can see ice wedge and also big portion of water, and we can see the difference in mesorelief between polygon center and crack. And on this small picture, you can see original soil level and the results of soil cryoturbation. And very important part in ecological role of permafrost affected soils, permafrosts, and also soils in polar regions with permafrost is that these soils, these terrestrial ecosystems, they are the most organic carbon stock of dead organic matter, of soil carbon, and this carbon, this organic carbon, is not stable, for example, on first meter, second meter, and sometimes 10 meters. Because we have global climate change, we know that the thawing of permafrost with warming occurs both gradually and catastrophically, exposing organic carbon to microbial decomposition. And for future, for example, like the right part of this slide, you can see some model which simulated increases in active layer thickness, and upper part of actual stable permafrost will be unstable. The thickness of active layer will be increased, and we can estimate the content of carbon in thawed permafrost and also in soil upper 1 or 2 meters of this permafrost. It's a real challenge to estimate the share of carbon and can be emitted to the atmosphere. And the small part of these soils, just 16% of total square of terrestrial ecosystems, and 50% of soil organic carbon and carbon in permafrost. And very important role because also not typical anthropogenic impacts, but also land use change and land use in polar regions. For example, pastures, sometimes arable lands like in Murmansk region in Kola Peninsula, 68 degree with modern and actual arable lands. It is also important role for changing in carbon cycle in these polar regions. Next, I don't like specific topic about soil classification because it's very sometimes strange, and I think it's very difficult and hard to understanding what's the point. It's a universal language for us. It's specific scientific knowledge, like in biology. And also we have several very huge and very smart classification systems in our world. And if we expect polar regions, I will say that Canadian classification systems, of course, soil taxonomy by USA, Russian classification system, but we have now WRB, World Soil Reference Base, and another soil classification which also can observe and the name and give names for polar soils. And of course, the last one, but not the least, is universal soil classification, and it's not officially published now. It's working process for understanding what is the universe, what is the main reason to understand for soil scientists, for example, or just for all agronomy people, for people who want to call this part of fine earth or not. And one of the best article and very important material is the soil atlas of the northern circumpolar region. Here correlation based on WRB, and it can explain modern knowledge about soil cover and about the major soil types of polar soils or polar regions. And here we expect the soil profile, soil body is going to the ground, to the cover, and we are going to the soil cover. In the soil cover, in the soil geography, we have to find the factors for formation of cover, and latitudinal zonality is the main global pattern of the pedosphere, but in polar regions, especially in high Arctic and Antarctic, it's not working, and we will see. For example, our first stop will be in the southern part of polar regions in northern hemisphere in southern tundra. Here we can see a lot of part of raw organic material, permafrost, or sometimes area without permafrost, a lot of content of carbon in topsoil horizon, in subsoil horizon, which can explain by cryoturbation in profile or in lateral processes. Here you can see the typical podzol or spodosol in tundra, southern tundra or lower Arctic tundra, and North Taiga are the best areas for podzols. And for example, the soils in volcanic regions with pattern of organic material and some ashes and some Andic materials. And on the vegetation level, on the bioclimatic factors, it's good for formation a lot of shrubs and a lot of grass. Next stop, low Mid Arctic Tundra, and we see also different different types, which is corresponds with pattern material, and here we can see a lot of also cryoturbations, and mostly these are regions is with thick permafrost. And on the left side you can see the mix of ice cement and carbonate material, and this is also important for understanding processes into profile, migration, etc. Next step, northern part of tundra with also some difference in profile, in parent material, in the thickness of active layer, and in the content of organic material. It corresponds with mesorelief in the were situated on a complex on the upper part in the center of polygon or in the crack, but especially in the very wet conditions we can expect accumulation of organic carbon, but sometimes no low content of organic carbon, but a lot of glaciation which correspond with groundwater and permafrost water. And for me, it's very interesting, and the most interesting geographical asks about high Arctic, where the portion ice-free area is less than in more south parts. And here we can see some soil profiles of cryosols from south to north with geographical latitude. And we can see here, for example, the northern part of Franz Josef Land. All these transect is from Franz Josef Land, and on the north of the Franz Josef, on 80-degree cryoturbations with big portion for organic material. Here on this level we can see glaciation and some different stages of iron accumulation and migration, and big problem how we can name this area, because it's typical for literature that is polar deserts, but glaciation, iron migration, and also we can see here real water and desert. So the good name for us it's high Arctic barren or high Arctic tundra barren. So a special local factors can explain the soil diversity and diversity of processes which is going to on the ground and into profile. And also in this area, in high Arctic barren, is very important role of ornithogenic factors, because it's very big colony of birds in high Arctic, and the guano is very important source of organic carbon and organic nitrogen, but the The genesis of this carbon and nitrogen sometimes are from sea carbon and sea nitrogen, because the trophic specific of these birds, because they seabirds, but the colony on the islands. Here you can see on the examples of Franz Josef Land and Novaya Zemlya archipelago the distribution of ice-free area and glaciers. So on the Franz Josef Land, on Novaya Zemlya, is real soil oases in high Arctic, like typical oases in the subtropical or tropical desert, but also the same in high Arctic zone. And this is the insular or patchy type of soil distribution. Of course, it's a little bit hard because it's too much words, but it's very important to understand that during a long time there are different landscape zoning and soil determination. The classic is the theory with soil division by tundra, subpolar desert, polar desert. For example, traditional Russian division with different types of tundra and also Arctic polar desert. And for example, ecoregions in Canada with different parts of Arctic. But if we talk about processes and soil types, we have to use a special non-bioclimatic zonality. It's specific universal zonality for soils for processes in upper 1 or 2 meter in permafrost affected area. And Sergei Gorachkin named 3 main zones in zones in Arctic, in Northern Hemisphere, low Arctic and subantarctic tundra, Mid Arctic Tundra, and high Arctic barren. No any desert, barren and tundra. And the main features which different for 3 latitudinal zones is the soil cover. For example, in high Arctic barren, it's contrast sporadic soil cover. We can see here some desert features like salic, but it's not enough for name desert, because we have a lot of water in soil profile. And the most down in the south and low Arctic or subarctic tundra, well-developed litter, continuous soil cover, but the main process is from south to the north, less carbon exchange, less soil cover, and specific local factors and islands in high Arctic of soils and soil oases. Next, we go to Antarctic. Here we see real new zone, soil zone, which named High Arctic Cold Desert. And the main region is McMurdo dry valleys and another valleys in trans-Antarctic mountains, with precipitation less than 15 millimeters, with a lot of salinization, with a very small part of organic matter, and sometimes just small part of microorganisms in sheltered soil biological crust in hyperlithic niches and endolithic epilithic. Medium zone, mid-Antarctic snow patch parents with wet valleys with a lot of water, but in a small part of oasis, with some fluvic and other features in the soils, and more close to Arctic variants of low Antarctic tundra barrens, which we can see in subantarctic islands in maritime Antarctica. And on this map, we can see that classical zonal approach does not work. Also, insular or patchy type of soil distribution. For every region, there are specific factors for soil forming and for processes in upper part of pattern material. And the coldest zone with real polar deserts in the central part is close to southern pole, but if we will see the small area in East Antarctic with Antarctic oases, we can expect that, for example, Pedogenesis is one of the southern part of Antarctica in eastern shore, but is one of the coldest in this part. And for example, Wasserman Hills, 3 degrees difference is very important, and in Arctic it's really working. It's working, but here it's not working because the square of ice-free area is more important. For example, in Thala Hills is less than 20 kilometers, square kilometers. In Wasserman Hills, more than 50 kilometers, and it's working. And now we will see the example of soil diversity and major soil types in specific very big zone on the Antarctica, in continent, in mid-Antarctic snow patch cryptogamic barren. I will show this region because it's unique and close to little bit Franz Josef or the northern islands in Canada, in Canadian archipelago, because maritime Antarctic it's very close to Antarctic tundra, Arctic tundra, and not specific because a lot of sea birds colony like penguins and a lot of organic material from the sea, and specific conditions and specific soils we can see in mid-Antarctic snow patch cryptogamic barren. Welcome to East Antarctica, to the Wasserman Hills. Here we have one of the main reasons that a lot of ice around this oasis. We don't have liquid precipitation. We have fragmental snow cover because very strong winter winds, but this fragmental snow cover is giving melted water, and from this snow patch they going to on the valley. And for example, on the center we can see this snow patch with small rivers and short summer, less than 3 months. It's not enough for typical vegetation with roots, but it's enough for moss cover, and we can see on the next slide some different zones. I see that not enough time, sorry. What's the first, no liquid precipitation. Second, there is snow, but it's not enough for full territory. Short warm season, not enough time for for grasses, but also big difference between soil temperature and air temperature. And in Antarctica, in this area, it's very important because the difference sometimes more than 30 degrees. For example, air temperature +5, the rock temperature 40 degrees. And the quantity of snow in these big valleys is important to drivers for soil processes and soil cover. On this slide, you can see some different month in warm season, and also new portions of new snow from cyclones and new water for soil formation. On this slide, you can see main soil types, and for Antarctica, there is specific division in soil taxonomy in part of jelly soils, and the typical and main for these wet valleys is in the there are some main geomorphological zones: bottom of the valley, slope, and the hilly area with rocks, no any fine earth, but not with solid soil-like bodies. And on this scheme, we can see the hotspot of formation and preservation of organic matter in the modern soils. On the bottom of wet valleys, we have melted water from snow patch. We have water in soil profile. Also, it's mixed with permafrost water in active layer. And here we can see on the first level soils under moss algal communities with macro profiles, reach only first few centimeters in depth, being confined to the bottom and slopes of wet valleys. And second zone, ecological zone, is soils under moss and moss-lichen communities with sometimes macro profiles, and they have 15-20 centimeters deep with a sequence of genetic horizons, soil horizon, classical horizons. But soil classification is not working. First group and the second group, turbicrized soils or haplocrized soils in WRB, or typic haploturbials or haplortels in soil taxonomy. And very specific zone in small wind shelters and wet depressions, where we can see refugium and in this rock path with fine earth, good flow of melted water, because some different regimes of winds in summer season, in winter season, and some snow patches they saved for all summer time. We can see here classical spodosoils or podzols in WRB with thick pit horizons, with spodic horizon with accumulation of iron, aluminium, and in the zone without any ornithogenic impact, because it's the main specific factor in Antarctic. The area in maritime Antarctica is a lot of zones with these soils. In Mid Arctic barrens, little bit less, but fresh colony of penguins is real toxic for any biota because it's too much phosphorus. But if this part abandoned and the formation is and formed in post-ornithogenic conditions. We can see normal moss cover with different genetic soil horizons, but with high content of carbon and nitrogen. So these post-ornithogenic soils looks like classical tundra variants in maritime Antarctica, more warm climate. Specific soils, unusual soils, soils on ice. It's Ukrainian biologist Tasherev. It's called the specific objects on the ice with succession of autotrophic and heterotrophic microorganisms. You can find the same objects in mountains with snow. You can find in boreal climate, in forests, but in Antarctica we don't have here any roots, any flora with roots, with vegetation with roots. So it's a unique possibility to see the sequence of life and interactions of organomineral interactions, where the ice is like classic parent soil material, and the soil formation on these objects where microorganisms they eat soil-like material, parent material, and the thickness of this object is increased. Second, and the last specific objects of weathering of organomineral interactions. It's solid-like bodies. It's called also solloids, or soil biological crusts in the rocks and in the fine earth. We have endolithic and hyperlithic biobiotic systems, are often not recognized as solid bodies. They could act as precursors of the more advanced soil formations, or even the only steady-state soil-like bodies, and if occur in regions with climatic extremes. In certain areas of hot and cold deserts or high mountains, various external stresses inhibit development of biota on the rock surface, and the organism find their ecological niche inside the rocks, left side endolithic system, or under the stove pavement on the right, metabolitic system. And the dominant autotrophic components of such ecosystems are cyanobacteria and green algae. Mainly, they form the biofilms, and they are capable of primary production under limited levels of light, because it's not enough, sometimes less than 1%. And for example, in the subsurface layers of granite, gneiss, and sandstone rocks, which contain transaclant quartz and feldspar grains. So we need some material for light. And organic matter components of the cryptic organogenous horizons simulate biochemical weathering in this zone of silicate materials, and I know that the new mineral formations inside the rock, and the structuring of weathered mineral fine earth inside the rock, and functioning of endolithic community here in the interior of massive crystalline rocks, in some cases result in the formation of alluvium and differentiation microprofile less than 2 centimeters, and mobilization and deposition of iron compounds can occur in rare events of moistening and subsequent dissociation of granitoid surface in Antarctica. And the last slide, that this process leads to unique result. We have microprofile morphologically and functionally resembling the structure of podozoals, sporozoals. On the right, you can see small microprofile, and profiles are formed in granitoids, massive crystalline rocks. However, these profiles are 2 to 3 orders of magnitude less thick than in classical podozoals, for example, in boreal climate or in Arctic tundra, and on loose sediments, not crystalline rocks. And this alluvial differentiation profiles in hard rocks were discovered sometimes in not these extreme climates, for example, in Plateau Ozark in Missouri, or fine bush landscapes in South Africa, but these endolithic soil-like bodies or saloids or endolithic systems of East Antarctica lack the noise from vascular plants and are among the best available natural models to explore organic-mineral interactions of a very old phylogenetic ages with non-wood vegetations.